Okay, welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Andy Lockwood, and we have a special guest tonight because we're going to be talking about sports recruiting, lacrosse and other sports, high school kids who want to play at the next level. With me is a friend of mine and Coach K, Dave Kotowski. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great, Andy. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I am. It's always nice to chat with you, and it's even nicer to bring your information to a wider audience, to my community. I get so many questions about, playing sports in college and scholarships and who really gets them and what are coaches looking for. So I'm going to be asking you a lot of those questions just to clear up the misconceptions,
Yeah,
the
sure.
urban legends.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of urban legends, and I think there's also a lot of bad information. Unfortunately, when it comes to recruiting with sports, not all of the high school guidance counselors are literally prepared to handle student athletes who are being recruited. It's a different process than a regular student.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the bad information is getting out there. All right, so let's see who's in chat here. So make sure you can see and hear us. So hello, Kristen from Atlanta. Good to see you, Chris, and another Chris Couch from out east in the Mattituck area. So please let us know that you can see and hear and where you're from. That's always interesting for me to know here. So before we get into, I guess, the questions and the substance. So
sure.
Dave is the founder of Team Elevate, and I want to hear a little bit about what you do, but Dave's also a former three-sport athlete at Brown. Tell us, I guess, in your own words, like who you are, what do you do, and how'd you start doing it?
So, you kind of said it. I've been an athlete my entire life. I played three sports at Brown. I played three sports in high school. I didn't intend to play three sports. I got recruited for football and lacrosse. And they asked me freshman year, they had a couple injuries in wrestling. And they asked me if I wanted to wrestle, and I was a good high school wrestler. So I ended up wrestling as well. And it'd be tough to do now, but sports has always been a very important part of my life. And I always say the two things that, really always kept me the most focused were my grades and what I did on the athletic fields. Those are the things that, always kind of separated me. And what I try to do now is both as a coach in high school, club lacrosse, and as someone who is a recruiting coordinator for a lot of kids throughout the country and helping them get into college. My goal is to give them my 30 plus years of experience and give them a game plan and a method for them to attack the college recruiting process. And that's what we do. Our goal is to empower young student athletes to be the best that they can be in everything that they do, so that they go on and don't just make a 4-year decision, but make a 40-year decision for college.
Yep, that's so congruent with everything that we try to do at Lockwood College Prep, which is one of the many reasons I think we hit it off. So, all right. So I have a bunch of questions to ask, and anyone who's just joining us, I'm Andy Lockwood, Lockwood College Prep, and with me is Coach K, Dave Kotowski, Team Elevate Academy. He's a coach and he's a recruiting expert, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about the whole recruiting process for high school kids who want to play at the next level. So that's my first question, I guess, is who actually gets recruited, who can get recruited, and then how does it work?
Well, I think, when you're looking at, sports in general, one of the things that is the biggest misconception right off the bat is my kid is going to get recruited and they're going to get a scholarship. And, it's because I run a girls high school team, and I also run a girls travel lacrosse program. I relate so much to what's going on in girls lacrosse, but we help a lot of kids in other sports as well. But, when you look at girls lacrosse, just on Long Island, where I'm located, we probably have, close to 100 different high schools that all play varsity lacrosse. So you take 100 kids, and if you take each team, and each team has, 24, 25 kids in it. So now you're talking about 2,500 kids that are playing. Well, how many spots are there? Well, there's only, there's about 115 Division I teams that are offering scholarships. Division III does not offer scholarships. Division II does offer scholarships. So just at the Division I level alone, when you look at it, you're competing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high school programs. Forget about the individuals in those programs, but you're competing against hundreds of high school programs that are all trying to get their kids into school. So the first thing is, when we really look at it, on average, probably 3 to 5% of high school lacrosse players will end up playing in college. So that's just who's playing college. Forget about who's getting a scholarship. So that's one of the first things is, if you want to play in college, you have to make sure that you're working hard in the classroom and on the field. And the better your grades, the better the opportunities are going to be, and versus how many schools would look to recruit you. It's completely dedicated based on what do your grades look like. The higher your grades,
All right.
the more opportunities.
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt. I want to get to that. That also. I think that's equally important. But I just want to go over some of the numbers now too. So approximately 3 to 5% of girl lacrosse players go on to play in college. Is that similar for other sports? Do you know any
It's
other
very
stats
similar
off the
for other
top of your head?
sports. Some of the higher sports, about 6% for basketball. It's a little bit higher. There's more scholarship spots in basketball. You don't have as many roster spots as well. And, basketball and football are the two sports where it's mandatory full scholarships when you're giving out scholarships, but in girls and boys lacrosse, you look at it in boys lacrosse, there's 12.6 scholarships, and in girls lacrosse, there's 12 scholarships. Now you're talking about 12 scholarships divided amongst an entire team. And, back in, 10 years ago, we would say that's, 12 scholarships divided by four classes of kids, because you have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Now, in some cases, you're dealing with 5 classes of kids, because you're dealing with redshirt freshmen, redshirt seniors. You're dealing with the COVID kids where these kids get an extra year. So in some cases, you might be competing for 6 classes of kids competing for those 12 scholarships. So how much money is there really there to give out?
Well, how many athletes are on a given lacrosse team? Like 30 or something?
In girls lacrosse, an average team is going to have about 30 to 33. Some rosters are a little bit bigger. When the bigger schools might carry close to 40 kids. And then in boys lacrosse, you're talking about rosters of 50 kids.
So a fully funded program.
A fully funded program has, right. 12.6
12 or whatever. They may not be fully funded, a lot of these schools too, right?
Exactly. So fully funded, just so everyone understands, that means if they're fully funded, then they're offering the full scholarships, 12 scholarships in girls lacrosse, 12.6 scholarships in boys lacrosse. But it's 85 scholarships in football. And that's why in football, you see such bigger rosters. You're talking about, schools like Oklahoma, Florida, North Carolina, they're carrying 125 kids on a roster, and 85 of those kids are full scholarship kids.
Right. So that's a big misconception I hear a lot. I'm sure you hear it all the time. Oh, my kid's got a full ride to Brown, to row or to play lacrosse or something. So number one, the full rides are really few and far between. Number two, Ivy Leagues, right? They don't give scholarships.
Ivy Leagues do not offer athletic scholarships, but like you use Brown as an example, and I went to Brown, and I was a full academic scholarship. I got an academic scholarship to go to Brown, but there was no athletic money whatsoever.
Yeah, and they can find the money, I think, if they want a kid, enough, and the qualifications are there, but there's no full rides. I hear this all the time. I'm sure you do too.
In my years of coaching, Andy, in all my years of coaching, I've only had a handful of kids, 5, that have been offered 100% full athletic rides. 5 in all of my years coaching. That doesn't mean our kids haven't gotten some big scholarship offers. We have kids that are getting close to 100% scholarship offers, but they've grown into those scholarship offers as they've become, really important players on their teams. They might have started off as a 20% scholarship offer, but by the time they're a senior, that scholarship is now close to 80, 90%.
Of tuition usually, right? Not including room and board, or is that also covered?
Room and board is covered under the scholarships.
Got it. Okay. All right, so now let's switch over to what you were talking about before when I rudely cut you off, which is what are coaches actually looking for? Is it is it only skill, or is there more to it?
No, there's a lot more that goes into it, and especially, when you look at it, what coaches are looking for is they're looking for the right student athlete that fits their program. So they want to make sure, number one, you're going to fit in with the team. How are you? Are you a team player? Are you just all about yourself? So when they're out there on the recruiting trail and they're watching these kids in their various sports, they're watching what type of team player is this person. Do they get the basketball and just go to the hoop every time, or are they looking to dish it and pass it off to their teammates and involve everyone else? Do they make the players around them a better player, or is it just about them? So they do look at athleticism. They're looking at speed. They're looking at your footwork. It's not just about goals and assists either. No matter what the sport is, it doesn't matter if it's basketball or football. They're not just looking at, one specific thing. They're looking at the entire package. And then what's really important is the most competitive schools out there, they're hard to get into. So, we always look at almost schools by conference when it comes to different sports. But, when you look at the Ivy League is at the tops. That's one of the leagues that so many people want their kids to be able to have access to. But Ivy Leagues, number one, they don't offer any sort of athletic scholarship. So, and they don't offer academic scholarships anymore. It's all financial need. And that's one of the things where, you're an expert on that and that. It's all need based. So no longer can you win a scholarship. But I probably would have been a full financial aid kid back in the day, but I ended up getting a scholarship to Brown because of that. But a lot of that has changed. And then the next, looking at leagues per se, is we always look at the Patriot League, because the Patriot League and the Ivy League are the only two leagues in the country that use what's called the academic index. That means you have to have a certain grade point average and a certain ACT, SAT score that is similar to the incoming freshman class. And if it's not going to be recruited. So they're looking at that entire class that comes in. Then you look at independent schools or schools that are high academic that are also, big programs. University of North Carolina, as an example. It's really hard to get into University of North Carolina if you're out of state. So, I know kids that have gotten into Ivy League schools and didn't get into University of North Carolina. Then you have, the Northwest of the world, the Stanfords, USC, all really high academic schools, but you need a combination of being a really good athlete and you have to have the grades.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because you've told me some stories in the past that really revolve around the kid's character. So not only on the field, but also off the field. So on the field, I've heard stories from other coaches about when they're recruiting kids, how they watch them and their behavior. Are they arguing calls? Are they bitching at the ump or the refs? Are
sure.
they throwing their helmet around? And
are they arguing with their coach? Are they giving the hands up all the time? It wasn't me. I always say that. As soon as I see the hands up, they did something wrong. It wasn't me. Are they slamming their stick because they didn't make a play or whatever it may be? All those things get taken into it. And it's also, they look at what is your interaction with the parents. Is the parent crazy on the sidelines? I know some very high level college coaches where they don't wear their school colors. Other coaches do. So you'll see a coach and go, oh, that's obviously the coach from Boston College, because they're wearing all Boston College gear. Other coaches might not wear anything and sit on the sidelines because they want to see who are the crazy parents, what parent is screaming their head off. And when they find out what kid's number it is, a line goes right through that kid and they get crossed off the field. Is there a bad interactions between the parent and the kid? It's the end of a tournament. And, right afterwards, the parent gets in the kid's face and say, you should have done this. You should have done that. They look at that stuff. They see everything. And then the other side of it is they see a lot of it too from social media. What are you posting on social media? And I'm sure we'll get into that and some questions on that as well.
Yeah. So you told me a great story a couple of years ago about a kid who was going down on a recruiting trip and posted something like, "I can't wait to get all banged up with, talking about all the drinking they were going to do." And the coach saw that. You remember that
At
story?
a Patriot League school, coach saw it and then questioned the player about it on their social media and said, what were you expecting out of your recruiting trip here? And do you have a drinking problem?
I don't think I ever told you this, but I have a client of mine, really good friend of mine, but she's out in San Diego, and she's like a marketing product person. She puts products together, and she did a product for John Wooden's family, the UCLA Wizard
Sure.
of Westwood, that. So,
Absolutely. The John Wooden
and
pyramid of
part of
success.
that, yeah. So that family basically hired her to put all his knowledge together into a product, so it's out there for sale. And she was telling me about a year ago that part of what she did for her research and to create the product was they polled 130 Division I and other coaches to ask what are the number one things that you look for when you're recruiting. And she said like the top 12 to 15 had nothing to do with skill or athleticism. It was all about this character stuff, maturity, perseverance, overcoming obstacles, being a good teammate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I always remember that.
Yeah, we did a
so
poll.
striking.
We did a poll as well of college coaches asking them what they were looking for, and exactly what you just said. It's those other things. Are you a self-starter? Are you someone that is gonna work hard on your own? They look for things like that. They want to hear from your high school coach, from your club coach. What type of player are they? Like I have a kid right now who's a 2023. This kid is one of the hardest working kids off the field, and it's all documented because we track it. So if a coach asks me what kind of kid is this, I'll say, you want to see what they do off the field? Here it is, because we track it, and we track how hard they work. And those things go into it because that's what a coach wants. They want someone who's going to be a blessing to their team, who's going to fit in, who's going to make the players around them. That's what they're looking for. And if you're a beast, if you're a beast on the field and have great grades, you make that so much easier for the coaches to recruit you.
Yeah, well, I imagine they don't want to waste a year and a half of recruiting to have a kid flunk out once they get to college, right?
Yeah, and do you have the grades? Do they really want to be there? Those are the things too. I think are just super important.
Good. All right, so I see some questions coming in. If you're just joining us, I'm Andy Lockwood with Lockwood College Prep, interviewing our expert here on recruiting, Coach K, Dave Kotowski of Team Elevate Academy. What would you say? I'll put you on the spot here. What would you say is either the biggest or one of the biggest mistakes that athletes and or parents commit in the recruiting process?
I think it's really a combination of two things. One is the thought that someone's going to find me and I'm going to get recruited. And that if even just because I'm the stud athlete, I'm going to get recruited and someone's going to find me. And I think the second mistake is not having an overall recruiting game plan. And those are the two things. I mean, I'll give you a real world example. My oldest daughter, Victoria, who was an All-American lacrosse player and played one lacrosse, she was also a tremendous field hockey player. And she was the first person in her high school to make first team All-State in field hockey. She made first team All Long Island in field hockey as well. Some say it might even be harder to make first team All Long Island than it is All-State, but she made both. So she's a tremendous field hockey player. The amount of coaches that reached out to her because she was such a great field hockey player was a whopping zero. Not one coach reached out to her because she wasn't actually going after coaches. She wasn't letting them know that I want to play field hockey in college because she wanted to play lacrosse. But even with being a great field hockey player, someone might say, "Hey, that kid's not committed any." Where do I find that kid? That doesn't happen. It can happen. It's really, really rare that it does happen, though.
So yeah, I just picture all these coaches going to these showcases and there's like 1,500 helmets bumping into each other, running around. Like I don't know how they know. I mean, I'm sure they have some idea, but it must be very hard for them to know exactly who to focus on. So how do you advise student athletes if it's given this advice to market themselves, to reach out?
Well, one of the things we always say is, how do you differentiate yourself? That's what
Yeah.
you need to do. You need to differentiate yourself in this process. So, I mean, one of the things too is, we like to use the term that recruiting is sport, and you have to make the contact. So a great thing is, I'll give you a real world example. You are getting ready to play in a tournament. So I actually have one of my kids who plays lacrosse for me. She's also a big time basketball player. She's playing in a tournament I think on May 22nd, a basketball tournament. What we need to do before that tournament is she needs to send emails out to all of the coaches that she knows will be attending that tournament. And she also needs to just send emails out to the other coaches of the schools that she's interested in, letting you know that she's playing in that tournament. Now, with game film being easily sent, you just want to let these coaches know. So what ends up happening is, if you're on a team of, doesn't matter whether it's football, lacrosse, or baseball, but if you and your teammates are all messaging and emailing college coaches about, I'm playing in this tournament against this team at this time on this field, and I'll be wearing number 42, well, they mark it off in their calendar and they say, okay, I'm going to go watch the first 15 minutes of this game on field number 4 because there are 4 kids from the same team who've all emailed us. So it'll give me a chance to see 4 kids, not just 1 kid. So the more kids that are involved in your team, there's a good chance that the more college coaches are going to come see that team play.
So I think that's terrific. And I think the other thing that's even, I guess, more bigger picture, like more valuable about that, is you're really teaching them life skills. I mean, learning how to advocate for yourself and do all these things to maybe step out of your comfort zone, because a lot of kids aren't, I'm sure, not comfortable doing what you just recommended. The way you said that this is really not about getting them to play in college, it's about the 4 years afterward. I think that's a great skill. People learn how to advocate for themselves, do the best.
One of the things that we do, and how I also differentiate myself, is we build for each student athlete a recruiting team. So we build a team for each kid, and that team is made up of a lot of different people. The parents are involved; they're on the team. The kid is on the team, but make no doubt about it, that student athlete, they are the centerpiece of the team. This is their recruiting process. It's not their parents' recruiting process. So college coaches know when they get an email from a 15, 16, or 17-year-old kid versus an email from a parent, how it's written. Yeah. And, Andy, I think I told you the story, years ago. One of the craziest stories is, we had a kid that was being recruited by a college coach. I was on the phone with the coach, speaking to him about the offer. They were going to make the offer to the kid that day, and said, I just need to make it, I want to call them. And so called the cell phone. The kid didn't answer the cell phone. The mom answered the cell phone and made believe she was the kid. And then the coach realized they were not talking to the kid and they were talking to the parent. They called me back and just said, I'm just letting you know, we're pulling the offer, because if this kid is so afraid to get on a phone call with me and not speak to me, how am I going to be able to coach them? That actually happened. And it's crazy.
Yeah, it's sad and crazy. Yeah. All right. So a lot of questions coming in here, not only about lacrosse. So if you guys are watching and you have some questions that came to mind from anything Dave was saying, or just anything about recruiting, pop them in here. We have another few minutes left that Dave has graciously offered to spend. So here we go. Robert has a question about baseball recruiting. Do you, it's just an open-ended question about baseball recruiting in general. Do you have any specific stuff to offer, or general?
I think baseball is one of the, it's kind of a unique sport because it's very stat driven. So, it's not like, high school lacrosse, you know how many strikeouts you have in baseball. You know what your batting average is in baseball. You know what your fielding percentage is in baseball. It's a lot different because it's so stat driven. Like some other stats where it's more individualistic, like a swimming or a track, well, that's driven by your times. What your time is going to help you get recruited. But in baseball, in other sports, they're going to need to see, are you a pitcher? How fast is your fastball? What do you throw your changeup at? All those things, it's a lot of stats that are driven behind it. So, each sport is unique into that. But we really focus on the whole recruiting process and not so much the individual sport. It's having a process to how to get recruited. When do you send emails? How many emails do you send? How are you actually getting those emails out to college coaches? What does your profile look like? What does your highlight tape look like? How do you make a highlight tape? All those things go into the process.
Great. Okay. And that's for any sport, right?
Any sport, doesn't matter.
Good. All right. Next question from Tracy.
Someone asked one question here. Does playing a sport help you get into college? A recruited athlete in the Ivy League is 4 times more likely to get into the college of choice than the same student with the same exact grades. 4 times more likely to get into the college of their choice because you're a student athlete.
Yep. Big help for legacies and recruited athletes. Those are the 2 big ones. All right. So don't jump the gun on me though. I want to do everyone in. All right. What about gap years for kids who are redshirted from COVID? Do you recommend gap years or 13th years for kids?
It depends on how the recruiting process is going for you. If the recruiting process is going slow for you, a gap year might be the right thing to do. And I've seen it in numerous different ways. I've seen it where in Maryland, the big thing to do is hold kids back a year. So they're actually a year older. So we see that a lot in Maryland, where kids are a full year older than the kids who are in the same grade as them. We see the prep schools where kids will graduate high school and then go do a prep school year, or go even to like an IMG Academy, where I've helped send kids down to IMG Academy where they're just not ready. They need another year of maturity, another year of playing to help them get recruited. So gap years do make a lot of sense for the right person, but it depends on your own recruiting process. I wouldn't make a statement that says everyone should do a gap year. It really is. It's up to you.
Great. All right. Janine Tabone, if you reach out to a coach via email and don't hear back, I guess her son tried during the fall and a few times, do all coaches respond?
Not all coaches respond. So when you think about it, these college coaches are getting hundreds of emails a day. And the other thing from the standpoint of a coach responding back to you, it also depends on what grade you're in. Because you can't respond back to you until September 1st of your junior year. So each school, if you go onto the NCAA, if you just Google NCAA recruiting calendar, you'll find the recruiting calendar for your specific sport, because each sport is different. But as an example, for lacrosse, it's September 1st of your junior year. So they're not even allowed to email you back. The only email they can send back is a generic email that says, thank you for your email. Our camp dates are this. If you are this age, if you're this, fill out our questionnaire and stuff like that. That might be the only email you get back because of how old you are and where you are in the recruiting calendar. If you're old enough, yes, they can email you back. They can text you back. They can call you back.
All right, so that just brought up another question that I want to ask you, which is about camps. So there's the different types of camps and showcases and all that. So there's the ones that the schools put on, and there's the other ones. Like, how do you pick and choose which ones are the right ones to attend?
The earlier you are in the process, I always recommend going to camps where there are multiple college coaches. So like we actually run our own prospect camp where we have, in this case, this year, we have 13 different college coaches coming. So we have Cornell, Brown, Columbia, Towson, and we have all these different schools that are coming to it. So you're able to showcase your skills in front of a lot of different coaches. And it depends what it is. Is it just a showcase where you're just playing games? What we do that's a little differently is we want them to go through in the morning session. They do drills that are set up by the college coaches. So the college coaches get to see the kids do something repetitively again and again and again. So if it's a shooting drill, they get to see this kid shoot the ball 25, 30 times rather than seeing them shoot the ball 2 or 3 times in a game. And they can get a better sense of that kid. So earlier in the recruiting process, I would go to those camps and showcases that have a plethora of schools represented. And then as you're getting closer to the process, and let's say you narrow it down to 6 schools, you should be going to camps at those campuses where those college coaches can work with you on a one-on-one basis, get to meet you, you get to have a feel for the campus, and you get to have a true feel for the coaches.
All right, great. That's great advice because I get those questions all the time too.
Sure.
All right, before I get to the rest of these questions, I want to put in the chat here a link to the special guide that you have written, the recruiting guide. So can you tell us a little bit about that offer that you have for everyone and how people can get in touch with you? And then I'll get back to some more questions.
Yeah, sure. So the guide it's a free recruiting guide. So we created this to help student athletes throughout the country. The guide's about 70 pages, and it's literally a step-by-step program for you to go through the recruiting process. Inside at the end of each chapter is homework that you need to do and get done before you can go on to the next chapter. So in there are specific things. This is a free recruiting guide. There's no cost. We don't charge anyone. It's set up as an ebook to receive it. So if you just click on that link, the elevateacademy.me, and that it'll go right to it. And then you download that free college recruiting guide just by putting your email in there.
So I imagine that, I've actually, you sent this to me about 6 months ago, and it was terrific. I imagine that a lot of people are going to look at it and be like, wow, this is a lot of stuff for me to do. I don't have the time. How do I get you to help me do this? So I know at one point you were helping kids through the recruiting process. Is that something?
Yeah, we do it. So we have a VIP program where they can work with me on almost a one-on-one basis and small group settings where I actually will go through the entire recruiting process with them over what we call a 10-week season. So each of those student athletes will get me for 10 straight weeks.
All right, terrific. And so do people get in touch with you just by downloading the ebook, or is there another way people can
they can get that stuff? Yeah, download the ebook, and my contact information is right on the website as well.
All right, great. Okay, back to the questions. We got a few more minutes here before we wrap up. A lot coming in here. All right, got a question about test optional schools comparing SAT and ACT scores in the admission class. Yeah, talk about that in terms of student athletes.
All right, so one of the things that we do is we encourage all of our student athletes to start the testing process as early as possible. So we want 9th graders to start taking the PSAT and SATs and start prepping for that stuff early. I just had one of my 10th graders just scored a 35 on the ACTs. That score is going to separate her from the rest of the competition alone. And she scored that on her first try, and taking the ACTs, which is just phenomenal. So even if it's test optional, and that might just be test optional during COVID, you still are going to set yourself apart with those testing scores. So I'm not telling any of our kids, don't take the test. We're doing the opposite. We're telling them, take the test. Now, boys generally score higher on the SATs and girls generally score higher on the ACTs. It's just how the tests are programmed, and it's a little bit of a generality, but usually that is how it works out. But one of the things that we also encourage our kids to do is take those tests multiple times, because what the schools will allow you to do is they'll take your power score. And that's how we want the kids to actually take it, where the first time you're going to study for all of the English and writing, and you study for that and you knock that out of the park. Don't even worry about the math and science. And the next time you study just for the math and science. And what they're going to do is you're going to take your best scores from each one of those tests and combine them. So that's one of the things that we always do. And we recommend it that you start the process as early as possible. We have partnered with Method Test Prep, where we created our own program just for ACT and SAT prep program. And it's specifically for student athletes because it's the way the program is set up. It's geared to giving you everything in small doses, just like you would have in practice. You run a drill. You don't run the same drill in practice for 45 minutes. You run that drill for 10, 15 minutes, and you move on to the next drill. That's how we've set up this program as well, is it gets them into that thought process. Like, I'm going to do 10 minutes on this right now. I'm going to do 15 minutes later on this. And each day, if you can give 10 to 15 minutes per day, you'll differentiate yourself.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, I think I introduced you guys right to each other. Right? Tom, he's a former college athlete too, Princeton guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a great guy. Yeah, I think the other thing that
one question
I was just going to say, if I may, one of the other things I wanted to say is that when it comes to academic money, so much of that is predicated on your SAT or ACT score also. So if you're in a situation where you're being recruited and they don't have quite as much budget for, athletic scholarship money as Dave was talking about before, there might be some other academic money that's in play, particularly if your scores are high. So that's another reason to not blow off your prep for the SAT and the ACT.
And what the beautiful thing is what some schools will do. As an example, Fairfield University. Fairfield University is a school that will stack both academic and athletic money together. So they're able to give a smaller athletic piece of the money, but they give a bigger piece of the pie based on your academics. And then the wonderful thing about that is, God forbid, you absolutely blow out your knee your freshman year and you never play again. That academic money doesn't go away.
Yep.
The scholarship money could. They could pull your scholarship the next year.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a renewable scholarship, right? All right, we've got time for a couple more questions, and we're going to sign off here. But if anyone is interested in learning more or connecting directly with Coach Dave Kotowski, I'll post it one more time. There's a link for his free recruiting guide, which is full of valuable information.
I'm also going to post, Andy, I'm going to put in here too my email. Great.
Okay. You do that. You multitask. I'm going to ask you some more questions here before we sign off here. Okay, so we talked about camps a little bit. Got a couple questions about NCSA.
Yeah, so, I saw that come up a bunch. They are a huge recruiting company, and I'm going to be honest with you. They don't have the greatest reputation. They're very big in football. Two-thirds of their entire recruiting platform is geared to NCAA football. The rest of it, the other third, is geared to all of the other sports. And they're a big company, usually getting a young kid right out of college who is trying to help you with the recruiting process. I don't think it's the greatest service out there, and they do charge a lot of money for it. You could do this on your own without NCSA.
Yeah, I will echo what you said 1,000%, because all I hear are complaints. Obviously, I'm in a sort of a skewed corner of the universe about that, but it's just like test prep. You've got NCSA is a big company, and they have a system, and they stuff these kids, who are recent college grads or whatever, into the system, just the same way that the big test prep companies like Princeton Review and Kaplan, that they do. And you're not getting experts. You're not getting the best. You're not getting an opportunity to work with someone like Dave, who is himself a three-sport athlete, and he's been in athletics, for a couple of decades. So that to me is a big difference, having the knowledge and the expertise, because you can make a lot of mistakes if you just rely on a system. So.
And I think what ends up happening is people think like, okay, I'm going to pay these people a few $1,000s and it's going to happen, and I'm going to get recruited. And the kids who I know who have gone through that with them, they might have gotten offers, but I'm going to tell you the offers that they got were schools that I never even heard of. And that's not what you're looking for. You're not looking to take a $5,000 scholarship offer just because you have $5,000. You want to pick the best possible school. You want to use your athletics and academics to get you into a school that you might not have gotten into on your own. That's what you're looking to do. And then someone wrote here, SportsRecruits is better than NCSA. They're really completely two different companies. SportsRecruits is really is a system to help you. It's not, they are not going after, they're not doing the work for you. NCSA is more of a recruiting platform where they're going to contact quote unquote coaches for you. But like I said, it's if you read the reviews, all you got to do is, instead of me bad mouthing them, read the reviews on Google.
Good. All right. I'm going to do the last question here. I guess, Ash, I'm sorry. I see a couple people having trouble downloading. So just email. Can I just email you directly and then
They can email me directly, and then
okay.
we can show they get the rank.
All right, good.
And then,
so the final question.
I'm trying to see if the link too is if you just do the elevateacademy.me and don't do the whole recruiting guide. If you get to the front page.
All right. Well, look, we'll work that out. Let me give last question rights to Trisha Joyce, who is a client of ours, so she gets preferential treatment. Trisha, so you have that going for you. Questions about track. Her daughter could not run track because of COVID. So do you have any insight on track? I guess it depends on the event, but I think that's another one of these sports where a lot of it's based on stats, right? I mean, that must be
time. You know, track coaches are going to recruit times. That's what they're going to do. You know, I had a lacrosse player who ended up getting a full ride to Villanova to run track, and that's because of her mile time. You know, she started running the mile to get in shape for lacrosse. And she started putting up these ridiculous mile times. She ended up getting a full scholarship offer to multiple schools for a track, and she was also a great lacrosse player.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of sports like that. Right?
You can still get out there with a track coach and have a certified track coach who will certify your times. So even if you're not out there, if your high school can't run, go find a certified track coach that will certify your times for them.
That is great advice, Trisha. I hope you wrote that down. That's a good one. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here. So if you have any questions for Dave, you know, again, if you can't download the report for some reason, or any questions about their services, dk@teamelevate.com.
That's my other email. I already put in the email in there for them.
Okay.
dk@elevateacademy.me.
All right, good. All right, so click on that link, and you know, thanks for joining us, Dave. Thanks for volunteering your time here. This is very informative. I learn something every time we talk, so I appreciate it. Any closing bits of wit and wisdom that you want to share with the group?
Remember that this is a contact sport, and sometimes also if you don't get the link, by the way, check your spam folder, because sometimes the way it comes through, it might go to your spam folder. But check the link. Everyone who puts it in, you put in your email, you're going to get the guide. It's automatically sent. It's run through a system, so you're going to get it. But the key thing is read the guide, go through it, and I would go through it as a family. That's what I would do. Go through it as a family and do the exercises at the end of each chapter so that you know that you're actually getting those things done. And if you ever have a question, you have my email. You have no problem. You could always come back to me.
All right. Terrific. Thanks again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and being part of these webinars. I'm going to make this a podcast episode on our podcast as well. So hopefully there'll be some more people contacting you and getting a copy of that guide. Which is great, which I can't recommend.
Thanks for having me, Andy. I love what you do.
All right. Thank you also, and good night.
Good night, everybody.